Hello and welcome to the great White North, your destination for the iciest cold takes from the frozen wastelands of the North. I'm your host, Charles Constantine, and with me is NP. Say hello, NP.
Hello.
That was okay. What are you doing with these? Last time you jumped the gun. You thought that would be a fun, silly little move. This time, blowing vapes while you're trying to speak.
It's just bad timing.
Neanderthal.
It's just bad timing. It was,
That was intentional.
no,
That was
no
just
bit, no bit. Just bad
embarrassing.
timing.
Yeah, sick, man. Oh, I didn't expect my host to introduce me at the same way he introduces me at every single episode. I'm just gonna drag on this vape right now. How could I have predicted this?
Look, dude, we're at episode 28. I'm running out of ideas. I'm trying to keep it fresh. I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, that's great. I'm glad you did that.
Off to another roaring start. Well,
Oh well, yes, yeah, it was roaring. You have something that you wanted to talk about, and I think I agree. And I think we should just dive right into it. And that
okay.
was this whole thing of well, you go. It's your thing. You lead it. You lead us into it.
Okay. Well, it's something that's come up a number of times. And it's like, well, I won't even name the examples because I don't want to start any wars here or be taking any sides on any of this where it matters. But sometimes, say, a politician will do something, and it's a politician we don't like. Say Joe Biden does something that's good for us. But, you know, and then we're like, yay, Joe Biden, I don't know, banned abortion or something. And then everyone's like, oh, you like Joe Biden? Don't you know he's a Satan? Don't you know he's a pedophile? Whatever. Like, no, I don't like Joe Biden. That's not what I was saying, idiot. I like that he banned abortion. So, I don't know. That's my entire rant. Like, I don't know. We got to be able to separate the what's good from us, like good for us, out of like where it's coming from.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point to kind of dive in a little bit because we get in this mindset where everyone in power is our enemy. Everything is control opposition. So just completely detach yourself from it, and no good's ever going to come from it because they hate us. So even if something good does happen, well, it's just a ploy to get you bought in, to change your mind and get you back on like a plantation or whatever whatever someone calls the given thing. You're just getting riled up back into the party politics, and you're a pleb. You're falling for the op again. Finkelthink or whatever.
Yeah. Sometimes,
whatever anyone calls
it's funny. Sometimes I even get these sort of comments just for neutrally commenting on like what's going on in the Canadian Conservative Party.
Yeah.
Like I'm sort of reporting it because it like factors into what we do. Like it's a thing going on in the world, I'm not.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Anyone who thinks I'm a conservative has just never listened to this show or read one thing I've ever wrote or whatever.
Yeah, it's one of these things that I think comes out of this instinct. I don't know where you'd say the instinct comes from specifically, but it's like this need to lose almost. Like it's this need, like your narrative depends on things always being bad, and like there's no reason to fight or advocate within the confines of anything because like it's just over. So who cares? And it's not even necessarily black pill. Like a lot of these people think, okay, there's like solutions outside. It's a classic. Oh, there's no political solution, and they mean there's no solution within parliamentary democracies that you inhabit. And sure, you're not going to completely capture the entire institution. And I think a lot of what we've talked about on the show has demonstrated that is sort of a like naive um, hope of like just suddenly all of the guys that agree with you are in power in these institutions. Sure, like that's fair, but that doesn't mean that you can't get good things out of it. And it doesn't mean that there aren't aspects, spots to leverage your own interests and things that you can applaud and cheer on and advocate for within that system. Like if all you're going to do is just say, oh, like I found a connection to the WEF, or I found a connection to some elite banker. So that means that no matter what happens, this guy is going to be controlled opposition. And so just disconnect from it. But what happens when that guy does something good for you, or that girl does something good for you, or that even just the rhetoric that changes because of that person opens up a field for you to advocate for your interests even better.
Yeah.
Just completely throwing it all in the garbage. Like, where does that get you?
Pierre Poilievre comes up to me and he's like, NP, you've been randomly selected for all Canadian citizens to receive $10 million. I'll be like, no, you have a mixed race wife.
Yeah, like what?
No, I'll just be like, thanks, Pierre.
Yeah,
keep it coming.
What is your where does that mindset come from? Where you just want to refuse anything that could potentially be good for your own people from the position you're in? Because remember, we're not arguing from a position where we're in power, or things are going to be good for us in 5 years or whatever. We're arguing from the position that we're in right now at this particular moment. And I think that just seems to blow by so many people.
Yes. I mean, we should lift the veil for anyone who's half listening and say this is probably mostly pertaining to the UBI debate right now. That revives about.
Well, there's that.
We're talking more generally, and it does apply to a lot of topics. But
Yeah,
right now,
because go ahead.
Well, the UBI thing comes up once a year, and we should probably address it one of these shows, but we won't do it in detail right now.
I mean, secure the bag. Like, I mean, it's not that hard to understand that aspect, and it goes back to if you can take rewards and things can get better for your people, why would you counter signal that? Just because, like we'll use the example of Pierre Poilievre, whatever. How do you ever pronounce that stupid name? Yeah, you can say, okay, look at how much the Zionist lobby he advocates for, or whatever. He's has very strong concerns for Israel. Okay, but if he opens up a discussion on affordable housing for Canadians, that gives you an inroad to make that point. You talk to some local conservatives, even liberals would probably agree that housing should be more affordable. And you say, here's this issue. Are you going to hold this guy? Are you going to hold his feet to the fire on this issue if he doesn't follow through? And maybe you can't change very much just with that. But if that's what people are demanding and they now see that's an option, and he's opened the space up for you to discuss that, then that is an improvement, right?
Maybe I'll run this by you. This might be nonsense, but maybe not. We're so removed from the political process, and I don't just mean us, but I mean whites in general, or like anyone who would have like a criticism of Zionism or anything like that. We're so removed from the political process that the political process is weather to us. And you wouldn't say, oh, it looks like it's going to rain today. I'm going to bring an umbrella with me. You wouldn't be like, well, they're just raining on you to shit on you. You don't give them the satisfaction. I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to try and use the weather to benefit me. I'm going to put my plants outside. I'm going to put a rain catcher barrel outside and get some fresh water, whatever,
Well, it's like what I think we take this from Matt Parrott. Just the notion of riding the wave. You can't control the wave, but figure out how to surf it and don't crash on the rocks at the end. It's one of those kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
like, and we see this in so many different places. Obviously we see it with the conservatives in Canada, or the elections of people like Orban, or the recent Italian lady that got into office, right? Um,
She's not 100% based. She's only 51% based.
yeah. Oh no,
Oh
she's
no.
kind of, again. There's some Zionism in there. Uh-oh.
Well,
Okay,
like
good that you
that is,
acknowledge that.
yeah,
Like,
and that's
yeah,
true.
like obviously there's issues with promoting Zionism,
Yeah, don't let her
and you're
babysit.
like, but no one's saying, oh, it's 100% good that this person is in, and they will fix every single issue forever. Um,
Show me the
People are
guy.
saying, hey, look at what rhetoric is coming out of this. Look
Mhm.
at what things she's advocating for, and say why not? What like what's the issue with those things being advocated for? National identity, stronger borders, um, more affordable families, like
Look,
all of these things.
so there's part of it is this. Our listeners are very smart, well-informed guys who read millions of books and all that, so they can make up their own mind for themselves every time. But a lot of times me, as a dummy, like say a theological question comes up. Am I going to try and solve it myself? No, I'm going to have to go to Tyler Hamilton and I'm going to be like, Tyler, tell me what to think. I have to
Mm-hmm.
put my trust in him. And it's just because I acknowledge my own retardation via theology, like that I know nothing and I can't even really, I don't have anything to do. Like I'm dumb.
This is not your field.
I'm a child in theology, or worse. Uh, where was I going with that? But so we develop heuristics. I'm like, how do I know I can trust Tyler on that? Well, I guess he went to school for it and stuff. But so for a lot of us, we're just like, one of the heuristics us dummies come up with is, I'm just not going to listen to a Jew on anything. I'm not even going to watch Seinfeld anymore. And, it's actually not a terrible heuristic. I don't mind that all the dummies follow that. It's actually a massive improvement. I won't do business with them or listen to them just because I just can't trust them
You
across
just,
the board.
hey, the track record doesn't look great. My odds aren't great, and I can't necessarily make the call in every
Right.
individual situation,
Okay.
right?
But then if you see a guy who you do trust, or you're like, yeah, that's a smart guy, that's our guy, I don't have any questions
Mm-hmm.
about his devotion to our cause, and he's always had a great track record for it. And he's like, okay, actually, Larry David is pretty funny. Okay, maybe I'll check him out then. Which, if the guy knows more about comedy than you do, and you put your trust in him that way, then he's like, okay, and here's the Jewy bits to look out for, so you don't get caught by that. And now you can appreciate the parts that aren't. You're forewarned, forearmed. I did my job as an intellectual. So let them do their jobs, really. And you don't got to know about everything. I don't. I don't know about nothing
Yeah,
except like my actual job.
yeah. Well, and you think in extent you could call this a movement, but a sphere maybe that so many people claim to be dedicated to hierarchy and authoritarianism, or this understanding of order, to just flat out reject any sort of authority or pattern of hierarchy or credentials just because they disagree. Like, it's like, I am all for this good stuff, this order and hierarchy, until somewhere along the line, somewhere in that rank, someone conflicts with my personal ideas. Then I become a libertarian and I question everything, and I'm a pure critical thinker. And it's not saying you shouldn't question the people higher up, but to simply have this reactionary stance where every time you come across something that doesn't match up, to kind of throw it out and not listen to people that probably know better than you, and just say, well, now all of a sudden I don't really care about order and hierarchy. Then what are you doing?
Are
And that's my genuine
libertarians their
question.
own dentists too?
Yeah, yeah.
I wonder, like maybe I bet some are. I'll bet some are. And I'll bet they're telling you that we're falling for the big dentist con. We're dentist fags. Um, I you it just you have no choice in life. At some point, you probably have to put your trust in someone who has more subject matter expertise than you. Choose that person wisely. I wouldn't choose a Jew for that, or someone with a bad track record, or someone who's given a bunch of money to Israel or whatever. Sure, fine. But at the same time, if that person then decided to wash my car for me, I'd be like, oh, thanks for washing my car for me. Just,
Yeah,
use your brains. And part of using your brain is to not just spaz
not
out
use your
over
brain.
everything. Yeah.
Part of use your brain is not use brain. And just to wrap it all up, it's just as simple as, yeah, you're allowed to take wins, you're allowed to take things that are good for you without having to entirely endorse the whole of what is giving you that thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Especially in like the political realm and even the rhetorical realm. Again, just telling some like boomer conservative or even just some average person who wants things to be better for them at the material level, oh, I see that you like Pierre, but did you know that he supports Zionism? Like, what does that mean to that person? Why do they care? They just hear, oh, he is pushing for more affordable housing. Like, that's good. I want affordable housing. Like like so much of this stuff is completely out of the purview of these people. So take the win where you can. And I mean, even we've fallen into this a little bit. Like when we were, earlier on in our first couple episodes, we were really critical. And the thing is you can point out the flaws so that they're there, right? Again, so you don't buy in 100% to the program. But that doesn't, again, it goes back to, okay, it's good that we know, but that doesn't necessarily matter for the average person. And we take those rhetorical wins, or even if you say UBI, the material gains, and then you push a little further and look where you can get more.
What I told my boomer uncle concerning Pierre was, yeah, I like where he's going with this housing stuff, although I'd take a stronger stance even. I wouldn't mind if he did. And with the, and being against some of this vaccine mandate stuff. But I don't think he's addressing the key issues like immigration and, and so we just discussed that. My uncle's a fucking capitalist pig, so he loves immigration, cheap labor. But other than that, like, yeah, at least we were able to talk about it.
Right. And that's, again, you just take what you can and understand that we are in a particular situation that only gives us certain options, at least in that sphere, that particular political realm. And yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward. So how about we move on?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. Charles, you sent me what might be the cringiest Twitter post I've ever seen in my life.
Oh yeah, you're looking at that one right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to read through this thing so we get the full context of it.
Can I I'll play you play Peter Dutton's inconspicuous, I'm going to think that's his probably bald spot.
What?
And I don't know what the rest of his name would be. And I'll play J Wolf Master 90.
Oh, you mean on this? Yeah, okay, yes. We'll run that. Yeah, we'll run that little screenshot from there, and then we'll go into where what spurred this on. So wait, which one are you playing?
I'll play J Wolf Master 90.
Okay, I got yeah, Peter Dutton's inconspicuous below whatever the fuck. Here we go, Peter. This is the guy I'm being right now in response to this very insightful thread. Okay, here we go. No prizes for guessing Darth Vader is a Republican.
And Luke is the liberal.
and Donald J. Trump is Jabba the Hutt, and Bernie Sanders is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Rebecca Guilfoyle is that weird singer with the long lips in the bar scene, and Mitch McConnell is that creature in Jabba's basement. Facebook is that planet that makes the clone army. Obama is Mace Windu. I could go on. I'm sure this guy has a lot more great takes.
Yeah, it would help if he'd learn a politician or a Star Wars character, but whatever, that's fine.
I love that he like had to mix in the singer with the long lips from the bar scene. Like,
yeah, you're right. That's very
really relevant. That's really really cutting edge.
You know what?
Political discourse.
I'm gonna pull back to my being a 16-year-old nerd, and I think the singer with the long lips from the bar scene is only in the shitty digital remastered ones from the 90s.
Yeah,
and he doesn't even know what a rancor is. This guy, like, I'm cringing as a mild, like, original trilogy Star Wars fan, as much as a political thing here, almost at this point. I'd never. It's cringe top to bottom. It's cringe on every layer. It's a tiramisu of cringe.
It's terrible, but we got to go through what spurred this little interaction on, because we're kind of talking about it in the abstract, but it's in response to something that is arguably even worse, honestly.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just going to read through the entire thread.
Oh my God.
And then there'll be a lot to
if I die, call my mother.
A lot to unpack here.
Yeah, if I die, just send my remains to my mother. I might not make it through. I might die of cringe. This is the absolute worst.
And this is from the Palmer Report on Twitter. And I'll toss a link in the description if you guys want to relive this insightful take on history for yourselves. So here we go.
Oh my God.
History has accurately recorded that the liberals of every era were morally ahead of their time, and the conservatives of every era were the villains. History doesn't identify them as liberals and conservatives so as to not to hurt the feelings of today's conservatives. Yes, that's why the history as this thing is like a thing that identifies, but history just refuses to identify these groups as liberals and conservatives. And it solely exists not to hurt the feelings of conservatives, even though the liberals are always winning. For some reason, history operates in a way that tries to protect the feelings of conservatives. So, I mean, first part of the thread, great. This is great stuff here. Second section here. In fact, if conservatives were forced to be honest, the strongest argument they could possibly make for their side would be, sure, we've been obviously and devastatingly wrong at every single point in history, but just this once, we're sure we've got it right this time. And that's not an argument that would win over anyone but bottom feeders, which is why the conservative leaders of each era have to work so hard on coming up with strategic lies out of context, false narratives to build their ranks. Lies are literally all they have to go on. The previous generation's liberal views are the current generation's majority views, and the next generation's consensus views. Every new generation is distinctly to the left of the previous generation. History acknowledges these facts, but just refuses to put them in those terms. In other words, each new generation starts by adopting the previous generation's liberal views as a baseline, then spends its own era debating how much further to the left to move. And in the end, that generation also figures out that it's its own liberals that were right about everything. There is no disputing this. History overwhelmingly documents this consistent tenet of humanity's moral evolution, but history is never, ever allowed to use the term liberals and conservatives while describing the liberals and conservatives of each era. Again, this makes a lot of sense, apparently, because the liberals win all the time, but they're never allowed to claim that they won. Right? Good. Yeah. Good intelligent discourse here.
The layers of cringe are even. It goes deeper. This tiramisu is 1,000 stories tall.
It's incredibly bad. There's three sections of this thread left, so we'll finish this off. Here we go.
Oh my God!
If we could simply get history to start labeling liberals and conservatives of each era as liberals and conservatives, most people who study history would figure out why today's conservatives also will very likely go down in history as having been wrong about everything. They would also figure out that not only are today's liberals on the correct side of every issue, history will ultimately conclude that today's liberals weren't nearly liberal enough, just as history already shows that every previous generation's liberals weren't liberal enough. But because history refuses to explicitly acknowledge this, people who study history often come away with the impression that there's a 50-50 chance that today's liberals or conservatives will be proven correct on any given issue. So what do you think about all that?
Well, we first have to confirm that this isn't some elaborate Sam Hyde satire bit. Like, Sam Hyde's not starting his own The Onion and calling it the Palmer Report.
It's the Twitter account for this Palmer Report has 500K followers, and it's got a website that is a very liberal website complaining about Donald Trump. And
may Allah please help me. I am going to Fed post.
And yes, talking about things that will scare Republicans. Oh, here's more Trump.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, this is a very real.
All right. Well, okay then.
Real
today
ironic thread about.
Today I learned.
Liberals...
Today I learned Tacitus is a liberal.
Yeah, apparently Plato and Aristotle, they were liberals. Their ideas came out in the end, and they're still around today. So that means they're liberals. And so is, St. Augustine. People still talk about his ideas. Aquinas.
Liberal.
I know that this isn't like they wouldn't actually probably agree with this, but like, where does this idea of progression come from when old ideas get out? Like, let me take a second here to put this all together. But
how do you even start?
Yeah, where do you like? We know where they start.
We've talked before about the eternal myth of progress.
History, right?
Yeah, we've talked about the eternal myth of progress. It's a basic liberal concept that humans have been just always progressing up from monkeys, and then smarter and smarter and better and more sensitive and more inclusive and tolerant, all through the ages. And that's why we can't have nice things like we did in the 50s, is because they were racist back then, and it wasn't so nice for blacks, was it?
Well, and so this whole thing of the liberal ideas always win out in history. So we know they're just doing like Whig history, which is, again, pretty much bullshit. There's like almost no truth to this.
Yes. But
their assumption within this is that it's always been liberals versus conservatives. Well, it hasn't.
No, not even.
The notion of like a liberal or a conservative is a modern convention.
And as they would conceptualize it, is even more modern. It's within the last 6 years.
Yeah. Well, the actual understanding of history is non-existent from this take. But if we actually extrapolate this out and say all of history, like, we were saying Plato and Aristotle earlier, but somehow you have thinkers like Plato or Aristotle, and their ideas win out. Okay, so I guess that means they're the liberals of their day. And then that continues down the line. So, I don't know, you have, like I said, Augustine and Aquinas, their ideas went out. That's, and then, okay, Hobbes' ideas went out, so he's a liberal. I mean, he is technically a liberal. He's first of the Enlightenment. But then, suddenly, so basically what you're saying is somehow from there, those liberals went out, and then conservatives are the ones that wanted to
drag them backwards into the animalistic soup
we should still use
discrimination.
It just, how do you can't even conceptualize that as anything coherent? Like, it's actually, my brain is just fried.
Okay, let's start with this.
On this,
let's make some clear statements. Viewing anything in any political battle in history as liberal versus conservative, besides like British parliamentary history and like modern Republican Democrat stuff.
Yeah, pretty much
It doesn't
before,
make
I don't know,
sense.
before 1700s. It doesn't, yeah.
It doesn't even exist before then. Like, not even a bit.
Like the early Enlightenment ideas existed before then, but not in terms of actual societal discussion around these topics.
Right.
No.
And we know from Burnham that actually mostly even our current politicians operating in these parties aren't really, that's just the formal meaning is their
Right.
party line, and they have like just real, usually kind of venal or like immediate gains or things they want. So none of it could, like, you could pretty much throw out the concept of liberal and conservative and understand politics and history even better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like this obscurantist mask their lane over history to support the current their current position.
Right.
Here, if we give you like this opaque view of history, well, then it'll be easier to justify our own current
But let's
position.
I'm gonna steel man them here, and we'll take like
Sure.
our good friend C.J. Miller wrote an article for the Occidental Observer.
Observer.
Yes.
Observer.
Observer, yes. And it was about the like liberal versus conservative temperament, you could call it. Now, this would speculate, and I think this is actually borne out in personality theory. I think Jordan Peterson even talked about this kind of thing now and then, but that there's people who tend to not want change just by their basic personality and try and like preserve things and be more concerned with tradition and history. And there's people who want to try new things more. And this is temperamental. So let's pretend that these guys are talking about those two personality types warring across history, and that the guys who wanted new things were always right. Does it make any sense now?
Well, just before you go, because I think that's a really good spot to go. Just before you go even further, even Burnham had this comparison where he talked about the democratic tendency versus the aristocratic tendency in the elite groups, right?
Right.
So that probably even fits in tighter when you're talking about, as Burnham said, history isn't history of the masses, history of the elites. So we have that in the mix.
So does it make any sense if what these guys are saying, if the liberal personality type has always been at war with the conservatives and that they were always right and that we should always be doing the newest thing?
Well, that doesn't make any sense. No.
It never happened that way.
No.
Not, you know what? And then not to say that occasionally the new idea wasn't the way to go. And we're still,
right.
They've got me talking in their terms. Oh, like they've got me thinking in that simplistic.
No, yeah.
I've actually become more retarded from having listened to that.
Yeah, they'll do that to you. But that's the important thing. Whether you're taking it from C.J. Miller's or Burnham's concepts, it seems to suggest no. It's not one idea winning out over another idea and consistently pushing things forward. It's tendencies that have, based on historical circumstances, technological circumstances, structural circumstances, getting pushed in one direction or another. Like as Burnham says in his text, where he talks about, the prevalence of you could have more foxes in the mix than the lions, and that's going to change things in a way not to progress ideas forward, but to make it more beneficial for foxes to run a country. And that comes with its own downside that leads to decline of that ruling system and then a correction. And then, so you could say at most, bringing that sort of notion of these conflicting tendencies, that a sort of stability or a metastability comes out of having an interaction between these multiple types or these two types of temperaments. And if you overdo it in one direction, you're going to run into some instability. Like I think one of the examples Burnham used was like the French Revolution having too much of this aristocratic tendency holding tight onto power
Yeah.
year over year and causing a greater pressure when the bubble finally
Right.
burst. It was way worse than if they had just lightened up a bit and given more of that democratic tendency, that raising up from the lower classes into the elite classes to refresh it.
Right.
So on the alternative side, if you're too far into that democratic tendency, then you're destabilizing everything in a different direction. And this seems to be an appeal, or at least this article, or not the article, this thread is an appeal to the notion of the democratic tendency, and they frame it as a liberal tendency, that they need more of us, and they only need us in power forever. And that's again, if we talk about the formal versus real meaning, the formal meaning is, well, liberal is good because there's good moral values involved, and it's going to be better for the people.
Yeah, as
The
soon
real
as
meaning
everyone
is
stops
we
believing
deserve
in
more
God.
power because we're always right. And that's what we're cutting to the core here, right? This is an appeal to power for our certain type of tendency, not an actual, making the world a better place or something.
Of course. There's some memes that come to mind. There's that classic one we always riff on, where it's like where we would be, but here we are because the dark ages of Christianity. And then people extend it back, and
I
there's
made a graph, and I emptied out the spot on the graph.
But then people always make it awesome by extending it so far backwards in time and including the Finno-Korean hyper war.
Get worse. Hyper wars.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so cringe. It's just like, and then the Star Wars on top of it. I was trying to think though, like how much cooler it would be if he'd been like Mitch McConnell as Gregor Eisenhorn, and I don't know, AOC is like the Tyranids or whatever. That's like, yeah, if we'd at least put it in a franchise that we enjoy, then I could hand wave away some of the cringe.
The other thing to take away is when you see people talking like and utilizing the language that we see in this thread, you have to be able to counter it to some extent, because people generally adopt this notion of improvement of morals over time, right?
Right. It's just nonsense.
So, but what again? Why is this nonsense? Because there's this assumption that.
Well, first of all, if you read any history, you'll start to just be the thought that comes to mind so often when you're listening to anything about history, or even like way back. You're just like, he's just like me, for real, for real. People have kind of not changed, and like the motivations and things behind politics are pretty much kind of identical as they were in like Greek times, like at a most fundamental level, like of the person. We all want sex and money and power and good food and glory and virtue and whatever, right? So it seems to me that most people who enjoy history are struck by the notion of just how little humanity has changed.
Yeah, they'll say there's nothing new under the sun, which I somewhat agree with, but not entirely.
I think even Plato said there's nothing new under the sun. Well, no, that's in Ecclesiastes, but I mean, I think it's just the oldest sentiment. A recurring sentiment is that there's nothing new under the sun, and that's a 4,000-year-old idea, which is funny.
And then the other thing too is there isn't really a guiding, you could say, metaphysics or just overall objective sense of what morals actually are. They make these vague claims to the progress of morals over time towards a liberal tendency. But what is your grounding point? Like, how do you make that determination?
Well, no,
obviously,
because
like you said, there's
it's really obvious, Charles. Their grounding point is progress is virtue.
Right, but
they tie it in a neat little knot.
But that's not even necessarily it either, because progress towards what? They never actually even identify that.
Okay.
They say progress, but if you made progress in a direction towards stronger family values,
right.
that
So,
doesn't count.
so
for
we
them.
know
So how do they
because
make that
we know
determination?
because we read their atheist posts on Reddit in 2011, and what progress means is people no longer believe in God, unlike those rednecks down south. They are no longer acknowledge that women are powerful and equally competent as a man. They acknowledge that all the races, one race, the human race, and there's discrimination and racism are just these conservatives holding us back from a true and loving world. That sort of thing. Progress means liberal values. Liberal values means progress, and it all just eats his tail like an Ouroboros, except his dick butt.
Yeah, but I want to go
dick
even. I
butt
want to go deeper than
Ouroboros.
that because I don't even necessarily. Because again, how does anyone identify what is a liberal value and what is a conservative value?
Okay.
We never actually see the root of that. We understand it's this sort of push towards negative.
Well,
freedom,
okay,
right?
wait.
No, just let me finish. Just let me finish. I got like.
Okay.
We
If you have an
a
answer,
couple steps here.
Okay.
Because obviously we get this enlightenment notion of negative freedom. Okay, free people from responsibilities, and I would say some of the base of where this notion of moral progress comes from is the freeing up of the individual from their responsibilities to have ever increasing freedom, and that is freedom from any sort of sense of order or hierarchy. So I would say that is where that fundamental is. But then they don't even have a real standard for what works within that framework. Because again, if you advocate for progress in the direction of, for example, stronger families or easier freedom to raise a family, freeing yourself from the confines of, let's say, debt slavery to raise a family easier, well, that doesn't really count as progress. So they don't even necessarily have this cohesive notion of negative freedom. It is entirely wrapped up in what is specifically good for the ruling power at a given time, which is the merchants.
Right.
So you can't have negative freedom that works against capital,
right?
Because that would mean stronger family, less atomized, less consumerism. So what they've done is they've basically ungrounded morals from any actual objective metaphysics that has cohesive logical background. Because you can we've demonstrated this as far back as Plato. You could have strong logical formulations for what is moral and what is good, and we've talked about on the show what is the good itself, and that is worked out. They don't have any of that. It is just what is good for the ruling power at any given time, and then we're going to do this like Burnham showed us, this formal meaning versus the real meaning. And what they do, like this Palmer report's doing in this thread, is just giving people this formal meaning of progress as a good in itself, but only those values that agree with negative freedom in the direction of profiting the capitalists, really. So that is working all this out on what's going on here.
That was an extremely loaded capitalists you just dropped.
Sure.
But yes, I agree. Yeah. So
the point is they don't actually have any moral. They don't really have a sense of what that moral is.
No.
It is just sort of a vague notion to serve
Judaism.
Sure.
Well, or whatever.
Like I said, like mercantilism in general. Like who can profit? How can we convince people to be more profitable for us?
Keith Woods once tried to boil down their actual telos, and he came up with transhumanism is his answer. Am I wrong in that? That the actual sort of, if you look at their end goal, is to escape the body and become an eternal unconscious mind.
Well, I think some of that is built in for sure. I mean, it goes back to that, again, the foundation of that negative freedom and free yourself from responsibility. And then it gets wrapped up in all of this. Okay, what can profit the elite class, and also, and then you pair that with being completely ungrounded from a sense of purpose, tied to the good and tied to a virtuous life. Well, then you get, wow, this suffering stuff, this struggles, this all sucks. So how can I escape that even more once I'm disenchanted or discouraged by the state of the world? And that's I think where that all ties in.
Or devil's advocate, maybe McConnell is the long, flappy-lipped bitch from the Moss Isley Cantina or whatever. We should maybe at least consider his point of view, don't you think, Charles?
Well, if he was, what would that change?
Well, then this is what David Icke was trying to warn us about.
Oh, so the liberals are the real schizos.
Well, and is there such a thing as liberal reactionaries? There must be. They be progress is whatever we hate. But
The fuck?
that must exist. Yeah. In fact, a lot of the Twitter janissaries would probably just be kind of that. They'd be liberal reactionaries. So they'd be like, you like trucks, do you? What if I got trucks banned? Then what would you say?
Liberal reactionary. I think it kind of fits.
They base their entire ethos on what their kind of like however Rick and Morty would parody a guy from Mississippi.
You're losing me now.
Okay, take the kind of like what you'd see in like a cartoon on TV is a guy in Mississippi like playing banjo. Okay, whatever that guy
awesome.
likes is whatever I don't like. That's a liberal reactionary. They're like, we're going to ban banjos, we're going to ban trucks, we're going to ban fossil fuels.
Isn't that just normal? Isn't that just a normal liberal?
Are
libtards just hate that stuff anyways.
Are they just reactionaries? Are they just? Do they base their morality purely on trying to spite their image
I think
of
it's
a political
50%
opponent?
spite of the underclass, the lower class conservatives, and 50% we need to have progress because that's, I mean, a lot of it is where they get their purpose from. If we don't change society in some direction somehow, it doesn't matter really where. I mean, it does to some extent, but they're just happy to see progress for progress' sake, and that's only allowed to come down one or a specific avenue. So they're happy they get their purpose from that, and they kind of get their purpose from the activism that goes along with all of that. And if there's always a problem in society, there's always a purpose for them, and that goes back into the article too. This notion of there's always going to be some like the liberals of the past weren't liberal enough, so the liberals now aren't liberal enough. Like, where do you even go though? Like, where does that end up ever?
Yeah.
Like, how do you get to a final state?
Right.
There's no equilibrium built into any of that, but it gives them purpose constantly. So that's why I think 50% is that drive for purpose. They're completely unmoored from the sense of the good, and then the other 50% is that pure spite and for that lower class.
We should move on, but I just thought of one really funny example of this, and it's when what I'm going to now term liberal reactionary sentiment encounters farmers, and they're like, you like growing us food, do you? And they're like, oh, wait, whoa, well, what if we took away your pesticides? So, and then they quickly move on to the trucks again, because they're like, yeah, maybe that won't end good. Anyway, I like what you're saying, Charles. I think you said it much smarter, and I actually managed to squeeze a fair few jokes in there, so I'm going to call that a successful segment.
Every range the IQ bell curve will get something out of this.
Yeah, especially the retards.
So thank you for being being dumb and listening to this. Thank you for being a midwit and listening to this. And also thank you for being smart and listening to this. Good job, audience. You did it.
Okay, we're going to finish off the Machiavellians by James Burnham here. And we asked some questions at the end of the last episode based on the book. And they went something like, did the managerial revolution take place? And if so, are the current elite those managers? Also, what are the problems with elite theory and where does it fail? Does it completely apply right now, or are there other factors at play? Let's start with that last question. You have some particular qualms that you expressed last episode that indicated you don't think that all power comes down to the sort of venal desires of the elites, but you do believe virtue is possible within these circles.
Yeah, I don't actually remember exactly what I said on that, but I do disagree with the point that he makes of this. It's almost like only those cynical, ruthless types can get into these positions and succeed, right? And then that kind of forms the elites to some extent. And the people that are the highly ambitious, obviously, you require ambition to be in these positions. So yes, like there is truth to all of that, but I don't think it's the be all end all. That's sort of this. It's a pessimistic view, and Burnham sort of praises the pessimistic view in sort of not being a. He calls it like a sort of dangerous optimism, and we talked about this last episode. Just sort of like the utopians almost always give the most, or end up spilling the most blood. Because they have a completely unrealistic view. And so, yeah, take this pessimistic view where things aren't going to be perfect. You're not going to get perfect leaders. You're not going to have a perfect society, but you're going to be able to address things in this realistic standpoint. So I do agree with that to some extent. But at the same time, the notion that it's impossible to get someone of good character into a leading position also seems faulty and lacks the kind of hope for a better structure that I think is fundamental to overcoming both the nihilism of this sort of view of this specific branch of elite theory view, as well as the sort of I guess hopelessness that kind of leads good men to throw their hands up in the air and just remove themselves from that process.
Yes.
And I think you need to have hope that good can still prevail in those leading roles, and that you don't necessarily need to be a backstabbing, cynical bastard to get in those positions. But it's just, what are the right steps? And that's the trickier
well,
question.
Okay. Let's start with Burnham's shred
at
of
a more
optimism.
local level. You see good men get in positions of leadership, whether it's like the dad that runs his hockey team, his son's hockey team, that runs the hockey team with virtue and doesn't preferentially give his own son extra playing time simply because it's his son, and things like that. Like you see that all the time.
Okay,
you even have
Burnham acknowledges the
good people.
Burnham acknowledges this. He says that there's
that basically proves the point. I don't need to have another example. That's I think that can be extrapolated up to the higher level.
Yes. I'm with you.
If we're going to go like a movie, for book reference, like it's that notion of the sort of reluctant king,
or the good king.
Something everyone recognizes, Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, right? Like this good, virtuous man that does not really want the throne, but and is sort of not attacking that position, not trying to climb his way to the top cynically, but by his own virtue itself, he is given that role by everyone that recognizes his virtue, right? There's this kind of archetype. And I think that is a possibility.
Yes. He acknowledges that. He just says that the bad kings outweigh the good kings 99-1. But I'm not. I don't want to. I'm just sort of standing in for him
Hello?
because I actually agree with you. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Did you get muted or something?
No, I don't think so. The audience can hear
Or
this.
did we freeze out? What's going on here?
Okay, we'll take a break. Quick break.
Okay.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. You were talking right over me. I thought you were just ignoring me, but no. Okay, yeah, the call had dropped out weirdly, and we could hear you, but you couldn't hear me. Now
Yeah,
it's
I was
all
just I was
fixed.
just speaking. Yeah, I was literally heard nothing coming out of you, so I'm just there sitting there thinking, okay, well, I'll keep rolling,
All good.
until I give you space to
All right. Well,
for a
so
joinder.
so where were we? I was trying to say that Burnham
Yeah.
acknowledges as the good king, but he says it's at like a 1 to 99 ratio, so it barely matters. He pretty much hand waves it away. I think it's like a couple
Right.
sentences in the book. However, why can't we be good king maximalists? I'm talking archetype of the good king, which relates your hockey coach thing was exactly it, and then you were relating it to books. I was like, yeah, that's about when I figured you couldn't hear me. Um,
Hmm.
so how, I guess, let's just ask the question: how would you maximize the good king, the virtuous king, the good leaders, the good oligarchy? It's going to be it's the iron law of oligarchy. It's going to be an oligarchy, so it can't just be a
Right.
virtuous king.
So it's never going to be a single person and we talked about this in much earlier episodes about how it's institutions. There's this false idea of like uh, autocratic, the autocratic theory of governance, right? Power confined to the one single sovereign. No, that's how it works. So you need more than just one good man to run these complex institutions and to be in these positions of power. Um, I would say the simplest way to be a maximalist about this, though, is you have to recultivate virtue at the local level, and really realistically, and this even goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the thread of these liberal notions of history and morals. Um, you have to basically re-educate a group of people, those of us who want something different, into notions of virtue, of what a good man can look like, um, what good leadership can look like, that is not tethered to this liberal notion anymore. So that requires a groundbreaking change in how you approach people at the level they're at, how you educate people, and again, we can't just jump into these large complex institutions as they are now, but we can look at what we have before us at the local level. So I think a lot of this comes down to where can you build good men here and now, where it matters, and then you work from there. After that, like after you reestablish this in your own communities, where do you go from there? And an important thing, and we'll tie like Matt Parrott's notions, the vapor trad model, and the potential for these, neo tribalism guiding things in the future. Um, a lot of this that comes into play might mean when you're approaching this good king, this virtuous ruler, maximalism, that kind of steps around the sort of Machiavellianism, this elite theory, the cynical view of men who the way the men who climb to the top. We can say that in like sort of these new tribes, as things sort of break down, are going to be a lot easier to manage and to inculcate. That's not the
Inculcate.
right word. Inculcate the right virtues in the people that are running your local communities. So I think that's important first, and then you can worry about the bigger picture after. But just so much has been lost uh, that you need to
Yes.
look at the smaller scale first.
You'd almost have to create a feedback loop between the rising new elite and the established regime. You would need some metastable feedback loop that where good new elite were allowed to rise up, and then that the elite, the current elite, fostered virtue in that lower tier. And so the monarchy was actually an example of that, although not perfectly executed.
Yeah,
And
well, I think that's actually an interesting point to make. This notion of the cycling of elites upwards. Um,
from now on, when we say democratic tendency, we don't mean democracy. We mean uh, new elites coming from the masses.
so that might be just one aspect. Like if you set up your community and you have virtuous men in that community and demonstrate competency and leadership, and there comes a point in time where the current elites are opening up their ranks to good men because they realize by some I think it would require some luck, at least with what we have now.
Yes.
That might be one, but again, you can't. If that opportunity were ever to present itself, you would need to be ready first, and I don't think anyone can really claim to be ready and to have developed the proper tendencies.
And this is why people naturally assume we'll need a Caesar or something like that to start, like, to bootstrap that process.
And that might be true. I know. I don't even buy into that notion of Caesarism at all because I just based on what we've seen so far.
Okay, but some strong like change in events and circumstances and some strong leader to get the ball off the ground. Get the ball.
Yeah, well, it would. I think you can look at someone like Trump and say, okay, look at the energy he brought for the potential to change. Yeah. Now, do I think someone like that's going to come around and actually just like smash?
Looking at either Trump and his supporters, I don't see any particular virtue.
So I don't necessarily think it's going to be confined to one man in this notion of autocratic sovereignty changing things, but I do see those kinds of movements, those large events and changes in sort of mass consciousness opens up that space. And it's kind of what we're talking about at the beginning of the episode. Like, do these changes in the political environment open up space to push people in a more positive direction, right? Can you say, well, this is a good example of why we need a good man or more good men, more virtuous men out there? That is, I think, where that potential lies.
Here's an idea, and it's just the corner of an idea, but I'll try and expand it as I say it. You have that notion in movies and TV or whatever, they come across some maybe post-apocalyptic or Klingon tribe or whatever, and this society has formed around the idea that if you can kill the leader, then you get to be the leader.
Yeah.
Now that is actually extremely democratic.
Yeah.
Progressive even. No?
No, I think it is a democratic in a way where.
So the guys who say that, post physique, you can't even bench 300, so how dare you tell me your ideas? They would say this is actually a perfect system of governance. They're not actually, I don't think, that far off. I'm going to start making an argument for democracy where we just have to have a system where you can kill the current leader with better ideas. And I might just have to go seppuku.
See, I think that buys a little bit too much into the free market of idea. The best ideas win out, and even the notion of the stronger man wins and takes a rulership. Sure, like that was maybe an aspect of things. Many.
I don't think that's ever actually been how politics works at any point. Even in the primate kingdom.
If we say like the martial, we go with Matt Parrott's sort of phases, and we say the martial age,
sure.
that first age, yeah, sure. It's pure physical 1-1 strength determines where the power kind of lies.
I don't think it was like that then. At all. But okay, yeah. Let's go with it.
Anyway, I think we're almost getting off base here. I think we should tie it back in to.
It's funny though that Burnham lets us recognize that the Klingon practice of the captain is whoever can kill the captain is actually democracy.
Yeah. See, that's a good point. But on that, because he does talk about what social revolution is in these final chapters, and this is going to tie into sort of with the practicality of this notion of the elite and the changing of the guard and the elite, and why you might need a vanguard to be prepared for that. And I'll just read through his 5 points on what a social revolution requires, and how a rapid shift can take place. So he says, number 1, when the institutional structure and the elite, which has the ruling position within the structure, are unable to handle possibilities opened up by technological advances and by the growth, for whatever reason, of new social forces. So that's number 1. Technology advances too quickly for the elite to cope, basically. Number 2, when a considerable percentage of the ruling class devotes little attention to the business of ruling and turns its interest to such fields as culture, art, philosophy, and the pursuit of sensuous pleasure. Now that sounds familiar.
Yep.
3, when an elite is unable or unwilling to assimilate rising new elements from the masses or from its own lower ranks. 4, when large sections of the elite lose confidence in themselves and the legitimacy of their own rule, and when in both elite and non-elite there's a loss of faith in the political formulas and myths that have held the social structure.
That's funny. Together. Let's just point out quickly that 3 is a failure of the democratic tendency and 4 is a failure of the conservative tendency.
That's right. And then the final one, number 5, when the ruling class, or much of it, is unable or unwilling to use force in a firm and determined way, and instead tries to rely almost exclusively on manipulation, compromise, deceit, and fraud. So that's fraud. That's all those the tendencies of the foxes.
Yes,
are prevalent.
And I forget which Machiavellian that is, but that's the fox versus the lions, or the cunning versus the militant.
So basically, these 5 conditions, I think, do demonstrate, or can be demonstrated in our current situation. So there's optimism in that.
Yes.
Certainly, the technological aspect. We talk about with the evolutionary technology all the time.
They can't keep up.
They're not keeping up. And our own spaces, we're opening up our own spaces of growth.
The fact we organize on Telegram and are telling you this message right now are proof that they failed.
Right. And there's nothing, no matter what they tell you about censorship, no matter what kind of black pills people in our sphere feeds ourselves about technological advancement, the reality is these are good things for us, not for them. Okay? No matter how much they censor, we're still here now. We already I completely forgot.
Well, here's an example.
The catchphrase.
Here's another example. It's a funny one.
Genies are the bottom.
When the progressives wanted all the police to get body cams, and then they did, and then they found out that a lot of these people are getting shot because they're pulling guns on the police or whatever.
Yeah.
And so usually, I'm not saying the police are. You see what I'm getting at.
Well, yeah, exactly. So the genie's at the bottle on this, and no matter what they do, we're here now. You're here now, you listeners. And even if they somehow they would have to completely destroy the internet to get rid of this.
Yes,
so
and they can't.
Sucks for them.
Actually, we should.
Too bad for you, elites. You did not keep up with technological change. You are morons. Fuck you,
Charles. I'd love to do an episode or a segment on exactly why they can't get rid of the internet and why that's a pincer. Because I actually that's one of the things I can actually talk about.
That would be really cool.
Yeah, I got some takes on that. We'll do it in a soon-to-come episode. And it'll probably fit in good with Baudrillard. Oh, little preview. Baudrillard coming up next.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's exactly, I think, just to jump the gun a bit, our next episode will be a little bit of a recap on the last you could call it season of the different ideas, and then we'll jump into Baudrillard, who will have a lot more to build off of in both in this technological aspect of things and even in these notions of power that we're confronting right now.
He's like McLuhan on acid.
Yeah. Yeah, and that
McLuhan on even more acid.
So then the number 2 point here is when a considerable percentage of the ruling class devotes little attention to the business of ruling. Again,
less so. But
I would say I would say there's the extent of like what is ruling. Yeah, sure, they're managing their own empire, the American empire. They're managing that, and they're still trying to push for their own interests, but they're not actually ruling for the people at all. They certainly aren't.
They're got their pedophile eyes wide shut sex cults, and they're just trying to well, whatever. They're a bunch of pervert hedonists.
And they're certainly putting the pleasure over a lot of other responsibilities. You could certainly say that, especially as what we're seeing now in these elite.
This is what
you can speculate so much, but you can say that they're not. People don't climb the ranks because they have an interest in actually ruling and like doing great things with an empire. They're in it for the personal rewards.
And
so you could say that aspect.
Even if you just go join a company, you got to go play golf.
Yeah,
and often the top guys will just have a really devoted golf game. It's like that. I'd say I'm going to give that one 7 to 8 points out of 10 for our current regime.
Then there's the aspect of the unwillingness to assimilate new entries, and we could say certainly for the competent young white men of our current nations, that is true. They are not given that opportunity. They're increasingly denied access, and I think while that does hurt our own men, it hurts them more. Yeah. They're losing valuable people, competent people that if they were given that purpose, if these were if the stations of the elites and the nations that were ruled by them did have a positive purpose giving role to them, then these men would be much better off if they could get in.
Scott Greer would be running public transit in some northeastern city.
But at the same time, these men are now, unfortunately for some of them, I think it's destructive to many of them, but for many others, there are a lot of bright young men that are still devoting their interest into developing their own skills and positions, but now building themselves up in different spheres outside of the elite institutions, which is good for those young white men in particular and bad for the ruling class. And this is another one of these things. You're allowing a space for vanguards to build up and while all these other things are falling apart, you're basically just continuing that social revolution along. You're pushing that around and making it a greater possibility because these young men want some purpose and they want to do some great thing, and you're not giving that to them.
This is even like there's like a meta layer to this. We're not even allowed to gather clout on Twitter. So we go to Telegram to gather clout, and in turn, because we are the locus of ingenuity and original thought and fun, white men, all the clout goes to Telegram. It's not that you didn't ban us from Twitter, you banned yourselves from us. And now Telegram is getting our clout.
And then there's this point for the elite losing confidence in themselves. I don't think that's really applicable here. I think these people are still they're high on their own myths. They're fully confident. They believe their own BS. So I think that's a strong point on their end. This is
0 to 10 right now. But so I've tallied up the score on 0 to 10 points for all 5 points, and we
haven't even got to 5 yet.
Oh wait, it was 5.
When I say unable to use force,
in a
compelling way.
No, that's a 10.
They only use manipulation.
Right. That's 10 out of 10 right now. Or else they'd be kicking in my door right now.
Well, I wouldn't say 10. I mean, they were still winning these for some like the
Yeah,
truckers,
sure.
that kind of thing. So, and every time any group marches, see that's the thing. That's where they're not very good at it, because if they were good, you'd say maybe like Patriot Front marches in the streets and they go all out. They're like, we're picking you up, you're gone.
Charles, I've decided to score them a 7
Sure.
for this reason. They are very willing to use force, but they have outsourced it to alphabet agencies and Antifa, like, and other like color kind of shit like this.
Well, it's
And
they vote definitely. Yeah.
So they're willing to use force, but only through proxies. I'm calling that a 7 out of 10 on my score sheet.
Right.
So out of possibility of 50 points, they have scored 37.
37 out of 50. See, that's looking like they're putting themselves into a position where social revolution will happen in one way or the other. Now, it's going to look different than previous revolutions, I think, because of the nature of the technological aspect of things.
Do you think it'll be the war of the flea?
I don't even know about that.
Okay,
I think it's going to be more so like. I'm going to keep tying it back to the devolutionary technology thing, and local, more autonomous communities of ethnic neo tribes kind of thing. I think, and until I get a better analogy, until I see something that makes more sense to me, I'm thinking they've basically laid the groundwork, or not even themselves, but the groundwork is there regardless, where people are going to tribe up in some way or the other. They're still going to be fit within the technological framework of things, but they're going to basically be set apart from the system because they can use technology without having to be fully integrated within the same structure of the elites. And now, within those same spheres, you're going to have vanguards of not you could say counter elites or parallel elites, and then there's just simply nothing they can do as their legitimacy falters, and the legitimacy of these sort of tribal neo-tribes and their own leaders it grows over time.
They can barely maintain
a different type of revolution.
They can barely maintain their systems right now with no competition.
Right.
The first competition that comes along will likely have it if the timing's right.
And just to make it even a little clearer, it's not going to be like previous revolutions of direct conflict. It's going to be, I think, at least this is what I'm seeing, is these people just sort of fade into the background. These current elites just kind of fade as they are unable to cope with technological changes, and just sort of not be present. They may even still be big names in some mainstream media article somewhere, but it's not going to have any impact.
Right.
And
You're
going to look at your local vanguard of leaders and say, well, no, these are the guys that are actually getting things done.
You might not even have any direct cognizance of it, but it'll be like, oh, this company stopped hiring based on your CCERT technologist diploma, because that's the old card. They're actually using this newcomer's certification that's more legitimate because they actually do proper testing and stuff, and they're called the CBERT stamp of technological basedness. Like, it'll be like little things like that, like just little pieces of legitimacy falling away from one place to the other, and then those new pieces cross-legitimizing each other. It's just the exact way that the New York Times is actually more of a laughingstock right now among real people than it is a source of news. That's a huge piece of legitimacy that's fallen away from them. What's picked up those pieces? Like 1,000 things. But those will all be kind of beaten out in the free market of ideas. Maybe it'll be that Telegram channel I follow called like what is it, Media Matters? I don't know, something like that. Maybe Penguin will be replaced by Antelope Hill, and it is, bit by bit. This sort of
Well,
thing.
and it will be like multiple Antelope Hills, multiple independent publishers that pick up the slack that these uh, more centralized institutions just
Right.
continually fail.
Oh, here's actually an example of that.
Sure.
I was a writer in the Western provinces, and I went to like writers stuff. This was like 20 years ago, right? I was writing like adventure fantasy stuff. And I never met anyone who was published, except self-published, which was a joke back then.
Yeah.
In order to get published, people knew you had to kind of like go to Toronto or get an agent in Toronto or New York or whatever. But even then, we hadn't realized, but it was like quickly becoming clear that it was just shut off. But then, I actually know like a couple published authors now that have books that would sell as good as those ever would have. Like our friend
Yeah.
CJ Miller.
That's right.
Just by joining this clique, I've actually now met published authors. And in fact, if I was to say, I'm going to sit down and write a new book, do you think I'd be contacting a New York agent? No, I'd be like, Mike, remember that time you were on our show? read my manuscript.
Yeah. Well, that's I think that's the key. There is these sort of new spaces opening up that we're creating here. I'm trying to think of the exact right word. Like, it just brings the levels, the degrees of separation that much closer. Where, okay, some random guy in the middle of Canada, Midwest of Canada, prairies, is 100, 200 steps removed from large centralized power, in the publisher sphere, or even in like, any sphere that he wants to get in that means something in the global, on the global stage. That seems impossible. But suddenly, when you build your own decentralized institutions, these burgeoning spheres, suddenly you aren't like 200 steps removed. You are like 4 steps removed. And you can very easily just get to know people on a personal level. Even if it's only through the internet, you still have these connections suddenly that much more available. And this gives the opportunity for talented individuals that are locked out of the current elite structures to suddenly have access to spread their competencies for something that works on their behalf. And this I don't know, you could say leveling out or decreasing degrees of separation is the future, and it is going to be what it takes to sort of step around the current structure of the elite classes as we see them now.
I guess it's important to remember we're not the only ones doing this. If I was a brony, there would be a brony community, and I would have connived my way into their upper level group chats and get published through their mic. I assume that exists still. Is there still bronies?
Yeah, probably. But these people have their Discord servers and their own like, people do this. So you got to jump on board and utilize these things. Is this going back to Burnham? Pay attention to what the current social revolution looks like. Don't pay attention to what the old ones. His whole process in his book is attempting to distill these sort of facts of political orders, not specific to a given time, but generalized to fit all times. And this is why it's called the Machiavellians. This is what Machiavelli was trying to do. And while I don't necessarily think everything that he expounds from looking at these different elite theorists is always the case and always true, and it can always account for, in particular, technological innovation. But the important thing is that there is enough truth, there is enough repeatability of some of these facts of political situations in history that you can take the distilled facts and say, well, what does it mean for us now? But that doesn't mean you look at the 1930s or the 1800s or the 1400s and say, well, it looked like that for them now, so let's base our current action on that. We have to be it goes back to this practical application, this notion of saying, hey, what did we learn generally and how does it apply to the specifics where we are now? And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, NP or our audience, I think that's what we've attempted to just do on this past segment. To what degree of success we managed to make that happen, I guess we'll find out. But I think this more forward-thinking approach to these topics is crucial.
The most popular content, and we haven't seen our channel grow at an exponential rate. We've found a core audience, and I'm actually more impressed by the caliber of our listeners than the quantity.
Yeah.
If we wanted quantity, I think what we would talk about is, have you noticed, Charles, that there's no color in the world anymore? Everything's gone dark. They're shutting out the lights. The blacks are descending upon us.
Oh no, yeah. Oh, all the buildings are ugly now. The leftists are running everything. Oh my goodness.
Dave Cullen comes to mind suddenly. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Weird.
No, we're not interested in that, and we don't give a fuck. What we're interested in cultivating, and our people, are those who are able to look forward, use their skills, use technology, use the situation at hand to advance our people. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children, and we're not going to do that by bitching about the fact that The Cure is the last band that ever appeared on a magazine.
Yeah, that's just it's so stupid.
It's beyond fucking retarded. They've completely lost the plot. The entire point of this thing is to use your skills, you, the listener, those muscles you've been building, the brain you've been building, your weird fascination with trying to translate old Chinese texts, whatever. Your great ability to make your sisters who never long be friends, and to like build bridges that way, or your way to connive your way into the legislature of your local government, and then get along there and shake hands and have greasy smiles. Whatever your interests and skills are, we have to put them to play in the world. And sitting there whining that your boomers could buy a house for $5,000 isn't going to fucking get us anywhere. We already know that. All right.
Well, I probably don't have much else to say. I think really all that was left in the text specifically was just stuff about democracy and...
Oh, one more question to answer, though. The managerial revolution, tying into his other book mostly, but it's mentioned in this one, are those the elites of today? Or was there another revolution since then?
That's a whole other text that you'd have to delve into to make that comparison. I've listened to the audiobook on the managerial revolution. I think to some extent he's correct. At the other extents, it's not correct. And yes, competent managers at this point, kind of overthrowing the capitalist elites because of the necessity of the managing of complex systems. And his examples were, and we said this last episode, like National Socialism, communism, and even FDR's approach was a sort of he called it a proto managerialism. So I think there's some truth in modern states since then have had to develop some of that, and like maybe China could be a good example. Though I don't know if it's entirely accurate. And I think what's even more relevant is the discussion that we had in this episode about the sort of neo-tribalism, the manual age, you could say, if we use Matt Parrott's model in contrast to Burnham's notion of the managerial revolution. I think, yeah, maybe he was correct there. That's a whole other discussion to have. But we're probably even a step beyond that, and we got to look even further beyond that. Yes. And I think that's the key takeaway there.
I'd also be curious if there's not a similar revolution going on right now, but we can delve into that in a future episode as well. It'll come up.
Yeah.
Alrighty. I'll see you on the other side of this cut.
See ya.
Okay, I'm ready.
How about this? Did I tell you about how I owned a Redditor? That's what we call him, a Redditor at work.
Okay,
wait. Little Mermaid.
Okay, stop. You own any Redditors lately today, Charles?
What kind of lead in is that? Yeah, okay, that was a great way to lead in. Well, we're gonna go with this. I did own
most
a Redditor
blunt lead-in in history.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's the story. I owned a Redditor at work. Game over. Outro done.
Okay,
you started up blunt, we'll end up blunt.
What happened?
I talked to a Redditor. Well, it was really. Here's how it went down. Some Mexican lady and a sort of like is, I guess you could say like a hot girl BPD type kind of chick. That maybe that doesn't come that kind of archetype.
I'll save her.
Sure. They were kind of saying, "Hey, Little Mermaid, what's going on with this? Black Little Mermaid, and this is kind of weird." And they didn't really have an answer for it, but they just didn't like it intuitively. And I jumped in and I said, "Hey, yeah, no, it sucks. Here's the this is white representation. They're just taking these characters out and making them whoever they want them to make, and this is a Dutch fairy tale. There's obviously it belongs to a certain group of people who identify with it strongly." And then I pointed out the whole contradiction of, well, we want more representation in movies, but at the same time we'll take away representation from the groups that our narratives say don't need representation. So I went through all there. Redditor walks up and is like, "Oh yeah, what's going on?" And ladies were like, "Hey, well, we got some issues. This whole Little Mermaid thing's just crazy." And then he's like, "Yeah, all these people complaining about it." And then he starts taking the, race is just skin color. We're all just humans. It doesn't matter who plays the role. And they're like, because he had just assumed everyone would be on that side. And then these two girls were like, "No, whoa, hold on. Like that's not, what we're saying is it's kind of crazy that they're just removing and replacing like that." And then we went on this long discussion where I wasn't really mean to him, and he's a nice enough guy. I didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings, I just gave him the straight up. I'm like, "Hey, like this is what it actually is, man. Here's the reality. This is the European folklore kind of thing, fairy tale. Why is it okay to do it that way? Why is it not okay to replace? Some of the really basic things, and." He's like, "Well, all these conflicts that happen all the time, it's just a big mess. We just need to get rid of race. Eventually, one day, we'll all just mix in together into one big happy humanity, and all these problems can be overcome." And then at the same time, he's talking about the need to resist the elites and just they want us divided. I'm like, okay, they want us divided for what reason? So they can make money off of us? So you think it would be okay to destroy everyone's identity and become one big mass of blobs? Does that make us better consumers? And then he didn't really have an argument for that. And then there was, this whole thing. He starts going on about like history of kings and blah blah blah. And he had the very basic notion of like, oh, a guy says he's king because God gave him power. I'm like, oh, hold on. Here's X, Y, and Z why you're wrong. Here's this history of how these sort of like sovereign rulers get into place in these different systems. He's like, oh, well, let me double check. And he checks. He's like, oh, I guess you're kind of right that this notion of kingship as just someone who says God appointed them wasn't really how it got established. He's like, okay, you're right there. And then we did a little bit of race realism, so he's making some points. Well, here's the different skin colors. I'm like, no, here's X, Y, and Z why that's not true. I use a really easy one,
like bone marrow transplants or something.
That there was that, but there was something even simpler that you couldn't really, because they can never get around this one. You like, okay, well, why are Ethiopians and Nigerians different? Like, oh, well, what do you mean? Oh, well, why do like Nigerians are pretty good at sprinting? Ethiopians or like Kenyans, they're really good at long distance, and they have like completely different bone structures and even like lung capacities for that. So why does that happen?
And
between,
they look
like,
different.
Those aren't even different races. Those are just different ethnic groups on a continent. So like, what's going on there, buddy? And then he's like, oh, I don't know. And then Mexican lady goes, oh yeah, you're like, that's so true. Like, and then basically he had to concede. Well, I appreciate the discussion. I learned a lot. Good stuff. And then both the ladies came after and like, yeah, we agreed with you all the way through. You gave us a lot to think about. I think you made some really good arguments. And then they were all like, yeah, heritage and identity is really important. We shouldn't, destroy that, and we shouldn't replace that in media. And then libtard owned.
Wow,
total victory.
It sounds like he. It sounds like that whole story looks like a 3-year-old wandering into the jaws of a pit bull. That guy did not know what he was getting into.
No.
I mean, you're not. I'm gonna put you in the top. I don't want to insult you or compliment you too much. So I'm just gonna put you in the top 5% of right-wing commentators. And like,
wow,
everyone who listens to this podcast does so because they
gracious.
like to listen to you go on about this stuff. You've put a lot of thought into it. We've read books, even just the books we've read together in like this last season, quote unquote, of the pod. I'm getting smarter, and that's a real uphill struggle. So this guy, just a fucking normie, going on Reddit points, walking into the jaws of a guy who spends hours a week destroying this stuff. It's like a car going into a car cruncher. It's so funny. Like I never interact with normies in my day-to-day life like that, except my family, where I can't destroy them like that. I can, but they get all personal about it. It's beautiful to see. It's beautiful to see these guys not on the internet, where you can actually wreck them.
Well, and also with the public, I think that was a big thing too, is having this sort of public audience. And you talk about winning people over to your ideas online and online debates. It doesn't really happen that easy, but look, in person, when you see how this sort of plays out, and I've had a couple of different experiences that are along these. This is probably like the most telling one, both from having support from the audience and from the direct sort of the loose. Again, it wasn't really a hard debate. It was just this light discussion, more so, where you kind of opened some doors on things that these people don't usually have the doors open to on. Right. But it became so much more clear how you can just again, you don't have to be a weird, like, hateful about all these topics. You can just be like, no, I want what's good for people in general. These are these are just the reality of things, and here you go. And then when you have the audience and you have the guy, like, just the guy that doesn't really get it entirely in front of you, and then it becomes pretty clear which side gets it more, and the audience can see that. But that is more impactful in person than online, I would say. So I think that's one of the takeaways. Like, if you guys do understand this stuff pretty decently, you shouldn't shy away from having like a good-natured conversation about it.
I want to, you know what? There's one point you brought up in there that I actually don't know much about, which is the origins of kings. So we should maybe cover. If I don't know about it, that means I represent the retards, and that means we do not know about it. So we should cover that one.
Yeah, that would be an interesting topic to explore as well.
Just we can do it as a segment or whatever. Anyway, like and share, subscribe, all that stuff. Yeah,
and go listen to the outro song. I don't know what I'm gonna play. Something cool today as well. Something. Oh, it'll be good because every song recommendation is good. Mm-hmm. Listen to the episode on Podbean if you need that. That will be in the description. All the links for everything will be in the description. Also, watch the next episode, even though it's not out yet.
Yeah, no, the next episode's going to be important because we're going to recap the last 50.
Oh yeah.
Yes, yes.